Hello, welcome to part two of the Chiefs of Staff. So we're going to have a look at some Chiefs of Staff who have been seen as being quite successful. Now, the first pair were Donald Rumsfeld, who later on went on to be Secretary of State for Defence under George W. Bush, and Dick Cheney, who I said in the last video, later went on to become Vice President under George W. Bush. Now, Gerald Ford became president following the Watergate crisis, took over from Richard Nixon, and I can't remember who it was. It was one of these three, it may have been Ford, who said he felt like the airline of the presidency was heading towards the ground at great speed, and he'd been thrust into the cockpit to try and save it. Rumsfeld and Cheney was appointed by Rumsfeld to be like his deputy. And they were seen as having turning around his presidency. And although he actually lost the election, which took place to Jimmy Carter in '76, both of them were given quite a lot of credit for kind of running the White House and trying to get it back on track following the Watergate crisis. So they're often seen as being quite effective chiefs of staff. And note how they went on to quite high position jobs afterwards as well. Now, I think the person who gets most kind of praise from the book I've been reading is James Baker. Okay, he was Ronald Reagan's first chief of staff. He actually served quite a long time. He was chief of staff for his entire first term of 4 years. And interestingly, he wasn't close to Ronald Reagan before he got the job. He'd actually been on the campaign team for his opponent in the Republican primaries, which was George Bush Sr. And in some ways, that's probably a good thing, because it meant he could say no to the president and be quite upfront with him on certain things. And Reagan basically just left him to get on with the job, essentially. And he seems to run the White House with quite a lot of skill. The president was able to get on with making the big decisions, etc., etc. So he's often seen as being quite good. And if you compare him to who came afterwards, when everything went wrong, that's quite a nice comparison, and we'll have a look at that person shortly. The book as well also quite likes this character, who is Bill Clinton's second chief of staff, Leon Panetta. And again, he's seen as someone, I think it's called him, an iron fist in a velvet glove. So, you know, could be quite approachable, but could also be quite tough. And he talks about how to bring discipline to the Clinton White House. He inherited a Clinton White House that was in a state of chaos, I think it's probably fair to say, and he brought order and discipline and was given the authority by the president to do that, essentially. So he's seen as being quite a successful chief of staff. And again, some of the successes of the Clinton period in the White House were largely under him. And the author of the book I've been reading basically says that he was largely responsible for saving Clinton's presidency and helping him to win that second term. Possibly more illuminating about the importance of the chief of staff are those who seem not to have done a particularly good job. At the top, we've got Hamilton Jordan, who became Jimmy Carter's chief of staff. He was a great friend of Jimmy Carter, had really been with him since his days in the state of Georgia. And he didn't, from what I can read, he didn't really seem to enjoy the job and didn't really want the job. And he doesn't seem to have done a great deal of what you need to do. So he didn't often respond to messages from members of Congress. He didn't kind of liaise with people. And in many ways, the book suggests that Jimmy Carter really didn't want a chief of staff, and he kind of tried to do the job himself. And as a consequence, you know, he got very bogged down in lots of issues and people coming to him left, right, and centre. You know, the spokes in the wheel problem, and it all went horribly wrong, basically. And Jimmy Carter kind of realised too late and appointed a successor who was quite good, but literally was too late. Ronald Reagan's second chief of staff, he's called Regan, just, you know, slightly annoyingly. In many ways, he's quite a sharp contrast to James Baker. James Baker said the bit called staff is more important than the bit called chief. Yet Donald Regan often saw chief being more important than staff. And apparently he liked it to be announced that here comes the chief of staff when he entered rooms and things like this. Nancy Reagan, well, Reagan's wife, kind of blamed him, I think, for the Iran-Contra affair, which happened in that second term. The White House became quite disorganised. This crisis, the Iran-Contra affair, appeared, And the book also argues that someone like James Baker would have seen the potential danger of the Iran-Contra affair and would have steered the president well away from it. And of course, that doesn't happen. He almost gets impeached over this issue. Thomas McLarty, who was Bill Clinton's first chief of staff, again, a great friend of Bill Clinton's, part of what some call the Arkansas Mafia, great friend of the president, again, unable to say no. And that first 2 years of the Clinton presidency saw, the spokes in the wheel again. The president being distracted, not being able to make up his mind, making up his mind, and then different views would come to him. All very disorganised, and it kind of really stymied the president. And actually, Hillary Clinton, the First Lady, kept saying we need to get this sorted out. We need, she actually spoke to McLarty, who was also a friend of hers as well, to say, you need to get a grip, basically. And in the end, he does go, and Leon Panetti provides that grip, who comes later. And then I put Andrew Card on here, which in some ways might seem a bit unfair. But the book does suggest that he was a bit dominated by the Vice President and also the Secretary of State for Defence. Both of them had had the job before as Chief of Staff, and George Bush seemed particularly close to the Vice President, Dick Cheney. And like I've said before, Dick Cheney was quite a dominating character in many ways. I won't say quite a frightening character, but he certainly was very dominating, especially with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And basically, he seemed to really dominate Andrew Card, who basically was trying to compete with the president, but also trying to deal with this very strong vice president as well. Erskine Bowles, who was Bill Clinton's final, I think, or second to final chief of staff, interestingly commented about the Andy Card-Dick Cheney relationship. He said that under the Clinton White House, quote, the Vice President, Al Gore, was fighting his way to have lunch. But with George W. Bush, the decisions flowed through Dick Cheney, and I think Andy Card was okay with that. He's a really nice guy, but Cheney had the president's ear. Cheney had a ton of power and influence. He had knowledge and experience. He had the total trust of the president, and he was the last guy in the room. In my opinion, Cheney was the chief of staff. If so, Cheney was a de facto chief with a difference. He couldn't be fired. And in fact, one quality of somewhat advice which chiefs of staff often give to future chiefs of staff when asked is often, don't be afraid to be fired, or you might well get fired, basically. Often they do take the blame if things go wrong. And in fact, for Haldeman, who was Nixon's, he actually got imprisoned for the blame. So yeah, it was quite an interesting book, I thought. It has some interesting thoughts about the EXOP and the role of the Chief of Staff. As I said, do listen to the podcast. It's American History Hit. It was about April 2023, maybe in early May, April 2023. It's well worth thinking about. And if you do get an exam question about the EXOP, then do mention the Chief of Staff. I would argue, as the book's argued, it is probably the most powerful, unelected job in the American government, and also one which doesn't need Senate approval. And again, I think very few students in essays would mention Chief of Staff, or even fewer would mention any names or be able to discuss any of them. So I hope these two videos do assist you in your endeavours. Okay, and that's it. I will do another one in the not too distant future.